Oh, it's
one,
good. She
go.
just wanted it. You're right on. You were right on. That's perfect.
Yeah, it's heavy.
Welcome to Safe Harbor
Yes.
Wednesday night Bible study, and
Because normally,
just delighted to see family and trips and everything else that we've got going. It's just precious to have you here in the beginning of 2023, and some prayer concerns for us. Still hoping to see Mike and Jimmy Nell. Polly, any word about they may be here? I know he's facing a few things, but I have not heard. I forgot to text Krista Hominick. She had that very sudden emergency ovary removal last Tuesday, a week ago, and she promised him. She says she's going to be here Sunday, so I'm kind of assuming and hoping that she's continuing to do well. Rochelle is a walking advertisement for medical profession, from back to foot to
neck
to you just name it.
well, whatever tendon it is, I don't remember.
It's Achilles.
It's a different. I've got 4 things going on.
Oh, okay.
And it's
Do you make notes every
the
day?
sheath. The sheath that surrounds the tendon is
Right.
inflamed.
That's inflamed. Okay.
That's supposed to be only with ballet dancers and professional athletes.
Yeah. There you go.
You're special. I'm
Stop.
special.
Yeah, stop your special athleticism, okay? Oh my gosh. So we pray for Rochelle and for Beth and the family, and as she settles in, and arrangements and housing and everything else that goes with that. So
She has 2 friends from Louisiana again in
oh,
town.
good.
They're the
Okay.
same friends that came a few months ago.
Yeah.
They
Yeah. So
surprised
she
her.
got friends in from Louisiana.
Yeah.
That is neat. She needs. That's good.
Yeah.
Friends from
Gotta
low
be good for
places.
her.
Yeah.
Friends are good, yeah. I saw it this morning. It was on Morning Joe. There was an interview of a physician and a psychologist about. They've done an 85-year study on happiness, and the bottom line for happiness, out of everything else, is that you have friends and you stay in contact with friends.
Relationships.
Texting doesn't count, though texting occasionally, but to call them, to see them, to spend moments with them is really and they've diagnosed that it helps with your physical well-being, your heart health, and so many other things. And so
8-minute conversations.
8-minute conversation is what she said. I don't want 10, but I want more than 5. So you call, and she says one of her dearest friends is one of the most busy women in the world, and she will finally consider, okay, I'll give you 8 minutes, and so they'll call, and it's timed, and at 8 minutes they cut it off. So which means you jump into the conversation. It's not chit chat. You really are talking about issues and things that you're really concerned about. So just thinking about friends and people we stay in contact with and how vital that is. But Beth having friends in, just just even seeing how someone responds. They even talk about starting up a conversation with a stranger, finding out something about it, and just watching what happens. You walk away smiling, and it's just really, really commendable that way. We're praying for Dolores Lira, Val's mom. Haven't heard from Val, but her mom was doing well, even though she's still undergoing treatment. We talked about the Kramers. We didn't get to go carol them, but we heard for them, and we know that they're struggling. Elizabeth Roman, Sunday, I think Gwen was saying that she is
Had something like a CAT scan or something, and
they
no
did
cancer.
not reveal any cancer, and so there's some real hope there.
Yeah.
But for Michael, her brother, both of them dealing with cancer scares. They're young parents and just really scared that way. The Howes are still waiting for their dearest friend, Dana Pittman. He is under hospice care, and expectations are not good that he survives long. So that's really a sad thing. When Ronnie starts talking about it, he tears up, and so it's really a sad thing to do. Linda Anderson is going back this week. That may be where they are tonight.
Yeah, I bet it is.
So going back and having an MRI and just seeing where the cancer in her lung is and what's going to happen next, and pray that it's just really a good good moment for her to see that. Friends of Judy's and mine, Vita Bradco, Sandra Pratt, and Frances Quinn, dear women who have cancer in various stages of life and treatment and their fears. Ronnie Gibson, boy, he was deathly ill last week, and I called him Monday, and he was at the doctor's office all of a sudden, and he was sounding like Vicky, just hack, couldn't stop. It just driving him nuts, but it's also hurting him, his diaphragm and everything else. So he was there to try to find some remedy to that, and just hoping that would be done. Patty Bjork, I tried calling her. I left a message on her cell phone. So she's very weak and very frightened about losing strength and losing her independence and not wanting to go into assisted living, but she's just in a position right now where I don't know what solutions are going to be there for her. But we pray for Patty, and I've mentioned Rochelle already, and for Virginia and for Betty, and that's where Linda was Sunday taking care of Virginia. She was having some response, and maybe some of it was triggered by all the firecrackers going on.
Yeah, her blood pressure was up really.
Yeah. And if you haven't heard, the Hastie's nephew's daughter was the 11-year-old girl that was shot and killed at 12:01 New Year's night, and it'd be Ida's great niece, but that just was sudden. Ida called us during church Sunday morning to let us know that had happened, but Judy's phone was appropriately silenced, and you found the message or something from her.
She didn't leave a message. I just called her back because I knew she knew I was in church, so I figured it was something important.
So she called her, and that's when we find out that the little girl was her niece, great niece, and it was killed by those two men, and just a sad thing about what
So
was
they caught the
happening there.
shooter?
Huh?
They caught the shooter?
They have two men under custody, and all the news reports and everything sounds like that they're convinced that they're the two that were responsible for discharging their gun in a very unsafe way. There's no murder charge yet, but it's more severe than just simply firing into the air or something that way. It was a direct hit, and they suspicion maybe they were drunk and just kind of firing at the crowd across the street and trying to scare them or think they were going to create even more response or something, and the child was hit immediately, and the daddy was standing next to her, and the daddy heard the little girl say ouch, and he turned and looked at her, and she's laying on the ground in a pool of blood, and she was dead before they could get her to the hospital. So the family has a lot of trauma there that they're having to work through. So we pray for she gave us a name, didn't she?
Robert, and it's in my phone.
Okay. I was thinking I saw it in the newspaper article too, but the mother's name starts with an M, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right.
But it's really a sad case that way that they're doing that. Vicki, praying for you and Rick and the whole thing, and you're doing well. She's on breathing twice a day, so about halfway through my sermon tonight, she'll be starting her breathing exercise. And so, she's not saying amen or anything. She's just creating lots of habit for me. So, we will be dealing with that and getting beyond that. Did you find it, Judy?
Not yet.
My wife goes to her phone to find something
It's
that I
on
need to
Facebook's
see. And
Corpus Christi Chronica. Probably.
it's sitting right there. That was in today's paper. An article about her, I think. Oops, excuse me. I might be easier to be heard. Now, can you hear me a little bit better now? Turn on my microphone, so we'll do that. Nothing?
I can't find it.
Okay.
Melinda.
Melinda.
Melinda Silva.
Thank
Robert
you.
Melinda
Yes.
Silva.
Thank you.
Okay.
It was on the email that went out from the church.
Thank you. Yeah, I knew that we'd ask Debbie to do that, but
Yeah.
you just never know how much to share, and with the grief and the very, they're part of massive public attention right now, and it's just that sometimes prohibits a family from grieving appropriately. So we just pray for them. Just pray for them. My nephew Michael, again, there was no DNA marker left, even though he's got about 3 more very massive chemo treatments, but the family's just really hopeful that God has been able to provide a very special miracle. And reunion group today heard a couple of wonderful miracle stories and things that God is doing in people's lives. So we just thank Him for being the kind of God that He is for us. Really do. Okay, let me offer a prayer and then we'll do our Bible study in Genesis of all places. Yes, okay,
His mom, she's still suffering a little bit from the
COVID?
symptoms, but she has a bacterial infection in her sinuses now.
Oh my goodness.
Ew.
Okay.
That was her Christmas present.
But she had a
Ew.
pretty severe COVID symptomatic
Bacteria.
response.
It
It was
wasn't,
okay.
it wasn't too terrible. I mean, she felt like, a truck ran over her, but
Yeah.
but it, she felt 3 or 4 days later like, she was in a
We're back,
lot better place.
back to fame. Okay,
Yeah.
good. Because I know Becca Payne was the one I forgot to mention
Yeah.
of our church family that has COVID, and she's got all the severe symptoms
Yeah.
and just debilitating, and just wonder the long-term COVID stuff as it goes that way. So your mom,
Yeah.
any new move on the house or anything yet? Okay, it will be there.
Yeah.
She hasn't been able to show it yet.
Yeah,
Oh,
because she has COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just like she's got to wait
That's
for
right.
how many days. But
yeah.
it's
Can't
just-
lock her in the attic.
Yeah.
That'd be the psycho smother. Yeah, this
I'll
noise
try.
coming from upstairs or someplace would be not good.
drive straight
Yeah,
there.
haunted house.
Yeah. Do want to keep Holden Weaver and
Yes.
the Weaver family in prayer.
Did you
and
get that
next
long text from Brian? His dad.
No.
It was beautiful.
Blaine?
Blaine.
Okay.
I can start with a B. Okay, give me credit.
Yeah.
Yeah, Blaine wrote a long text and Holden's, scratch my right head, mommy, or come lay down with me. And
Yeah. On the Facebook.
yes,
Yeah,
well, I didn't know.
I did.
Gwen just copied it to me, and
Yeah.
it was beautiful to talk about how he's doing and complete sentences and took a walk, stood briefly, and they gave him a hug while he was in. But he still. The walking, he still has to be cared for, and they walk alongside him. But the fact that he's taking steps now, the prospects just seem to be really, really possible. So, yeah, thank you, Shane. Okay. Thank you for that. Yeah, we'll add that to the list that way. Okay. God, thank you so much that we have hearts and memories well enough to be embracing of issues and lives and circumstances of loved ones. For a brief moment, we have nothing to compare to what you bring to every situation. But for one brief moment, we feel connected to the incredible resources that your life and your grace pours out upon families and upon situations. Thanks for including us. Thanks you for making us family and empowering us to be family to each other. Oh God, bless us as we celebrate what it means to belong to you as your family. Belong to each other because of what you continue to do in our lives and for us. It is in the name of our Savior, our redeeming brother, Jesus, that I pray. Amen. Okay, Genesis chapter 42 of all places. And this is where we left off, and this begins the most exciting part of the Joseph saga. Briefly, I will this is just fun for me, for whatever it's worth, just put up with it. Throughout all of our study of the book of Genesis, and really it obtains pretty much through the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. There are 4 very distinct voices, 4 distinct authors or traditions that are reflected. One of them is the Deuteronomic tradition, and so the book of Deuteronomy is a very unique voice, very unique perspective, very unique theology compared to Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. The others, particularly the book of Genesis, is reflective of the earliest tradition, verbal tradition of the Yankee kingdom and the southern tradition, the southern kingdom, Judah and Ephraim, or Judah and Judah and the northern tribe. Ephraim was his name, but they split apart.
Reuben or
No, there were several tribes up there. Basically, the southern kingdom was the Benjamin and
Sure.
Simeon, or it was like 2 of the tribes, and the rest of the 10 were part of the northern kingdom. That divided after King Solomon's death, and he had some boys that wanted to contend for the throne, and they went to civil war, and ultimately the kingdoms got divided, with Samaria being the capital for the northern kingdom, and then Jerusalem remaining the capital of the southern kingdom. And in those kingdoms, in fact, one of the hints at the distinctions between the northern and the southern kingdom was that visit that Jesus had with that 5 times married woman at the well. And one of the questions that she asked Jesus was, okay, you Jews down there in the south, you say we're supposed to worship God in Jerusalem. Well, it's our fathers that say that we're going to worship God up here on this mountain, Jezreel, or whatever. It's not Horeb, that's the old Sinai. But whatever, I think it's Jezreel is their mountain near Samaria. And, so which one is it? And of course, Jesus' response, well, you get stuck in the old-fashioned stuff that way. There's going to be a day when you don't worship God on any particular place, because you're going to know God and you're going to worship Him wherever God finds you. And he responds to her, rebuts her, but she's reflecting the fact that the northern kingdom had a continuing. In fact, we do have some extant scholarly copies of what is called the Samaritan Pentateuch. It's the first 5 books of the Bible that is part of the Yankee Northern Samaritan. Samaria is the northern tribe. Judah and Samaria. There is the first 5 books of the Bible that was written down and was sort of their distinguished and their unique thing. It's much shorter than the regular first 5 books that is part of what we call the Masoretic text. The Masoretes were the scribes that began to write down the Old Testament first 5 books after the Babylonian captivity. But the Masoretes that are found also in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they compare them because sometimes there is a phrase or there is a sentence in the Samaritan Pentateuch that's missing in the Masoretic text. It's part of the official sort of Jewish Bible, and it's interesting to study those two. But the Yankee tradition we normally label as E, the Ephraimitic tradition, and the Southern tradition is called the J tradition, because the feature about the Southern tradition is that they always call God by His intimate name given to Moses at the burning bush. And of course, the stories that we're dealing with right now are pre-Moses, but it doesn't matter to the J tradition. They call it God by the name that was revealed, and they look back and they insert that name back into the stories that were meaningful for them. Whereas the Northern tradition always refers to God in the generic term God, Elohim. The E tradition is the Ephraimitic tradition or the Elohist tradition, and the J tradition is the Judean tradition or the Yahwist tradition. And so the J tradition, when you run into God, the anthropomorphic style, which God clothes Himself or presents Himself in human form, has dialogue, wrestles with Jacob, and Jacob's ladder, who is present physically to be touched and to be handled and called by His intimate name, whereas in the Ephraimitic, the Heathen, the Yankee tradition, God communicates with His followers through dreams or visions. The chapter 42, 41 was very much the Ephraimitic tradition, where Joseph has dreams and he interprets dreams, and that's the way God is understanding to be communicated. Whereas in the J tradition, God makes Himself known very intimately, anthropomorphically to the audience that He is addressing, and is very distinguished that ways. In the Southern tradition, I think I have this right. In the Southern tradition, Jacob is always called Israel, the name given to him at that moment where he's wrestling with God before he comes back into the Promised Land. And in the Yankee tradition, he's always called Jacob. And it's another one of those telltale ways in which they have different vocabularies and they try to address, what it is that they're doing. Tonight we begin in chapter 42, just the first 13 verses. Chapter 42 is almost exclusively from the Yankee tradition, the E tradition. When we get through with this in 2 weeks, then we'll turn to chapter 43, and we're going to run into the J tradition and how it presents and continues the story. There are a couple of distinct features and conflicting things as we look at this. One of them is and we won't get to this tonight, so I'm just going to sort of ruin the story for you. But
Spoiler alert.
Happened, huh?
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert, right. You can close your ears so you have to listen to this, so you'll hear it next week. But in the Yankee tradition, when the boys leave Joseph and head back home with their sacks of grain, having left Simeon behind, the oldest brother, they get to their overnight lodging. They travel a day's journey, and when they open up their sacks, they find the money that they had paid them for the grain in the neck of the sack. And they're terrorized by that. In the Southern tradition, which is going to be chapter 43, they're going to get home and they're going to open their sacks, and it's then, when they get home, that they're going to find the money in there. In the Yankee tradition, Joseph has actually provided them enough surplus sustenance to get them and their flocks home, so they don't have to dip into the grain that they ostensibly have bought. But again, in the Yankee tradition, there's another feature. In the Southern tradition that we're going to read tonight, in order to blackmail his brothers to bring back his youngest brother Benjamin and Joseph were the two boys given to Rachel. Of course, Rachel's dead by now. I think she died when she was giving birth to Benjamin. But those two boys were Jacob's favorite sons. Leah had 10 boys, and they were always the red-headed stepchildren. They were meaningful to their dad, but they were not important like Benjamin was. But whenever in the Yankee tradition, when Joseph sends the brothers back, he keeps and incarcerates the oldest Simeon and says, you go home and you bring back that youngest brother of yours to make sure that you're not lying to me. And so, they head out, and Simeon's left behind, and Jacob's already lost one boy in Joseph, he thinks. And so in the in the Southern tradition, when we get to chapter 43, and they come back and they're having a conversation with Joseph for the second interview, there's no mention of Simeon. It's the only reason why they go back is not because Simeon has been held and incarcerated. They go back because they've run out of grain and they're hungry. So it's almost like the Simeon event didn't happen, and that's just more than likely the representation of two very different, distinct oral traditions that colored and shaped this remarkable saga in ways that were meaningful to their own culture, their own time. The J tradition is very much more primitive, much more raw, and much more dynamic, and gifted storytelling and drama. The Northern Yankee tradition, the E tradition, is much more cut and dried, factual, just the facts, ma'am. It's what was that detective? Webb.
Yeah, Jack Webb.
Jack Webb. It's more of a Jack Webb kind of story, just the facts, ma'am.
Dragnet.
And that's the Yankee tradition, whereas the Southern tradition is, boy, it's Steven Spielberg all over again. I mean, you just get your excitement going and everything else. So tonight we are in chapter 42, and we'll look at the first 13 verses of this, beginning in verse 1. When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why are you standing around twiddling your thumbs?" That's the expression here is, why do you look at one another? And that's really kind of one of those things, you guys got to look at your face. Every one of you is just dumb as a rock. Why do you look at each other's face? You're not going to get anything to solve our situation here. You can do 1,000 things with this. It was a colloquial expression, basically saying you're just spinning your wheels. You're not going anywhere. You're not bringing any solutions. Why are you just looking at one another? And he said, "Look, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt." And we know from history that Egypt really was the breadbasket for Palestine for much of its life. Palestine was never a very fecund, fertile, sandy loam soil kind of environment with plenty of moisture, that you always had good crops. Egypt, the Nile Delta, they always had grain. And so we know through history from extra biblical accounts that Egypt really kept Palestine and the Near Eastern world alive in terms of sustenance, because they really could produce so much grain. It's kind of like where the world food system is right now, with Ukraine's bread basket being under threat. Ukraine's wheat production is so rich and so successful and so large that it feeds, I don't remember what the percentage of the world supply of wheat is, but particularly African countries as well as us, we depend on the Ukrainian wheat fields and everything else, and that's been sabotaged by the Russian invasion. And so that's why there's some inflation going on, because we depend upon their wheat and it's not immediately replaceable. So that was Egypt. They really provided the basic sustenance of wheat and grain for the contingent communities, societies, nations surrounding them, particularly Palestine. And he says, I've heard there's grain in Egypt. Well, duh, there's always grain in Egypt, you could almost say, but it's a drought, it's a famine. And yet, Egypt's got their grain. Much more dependent not upon the weather as much as the flooding and the nourishment of the Nile River Delta at the top end of Egypt, which was extremely vulnerable to attacks and to pillage and everything else. It was so marshy and so infirm that you couldn't build real defense outposts along that large stretch of Egyptian territory. The rest of the Egypt boundaries were well guarded and cared for, but not the Delta. And keep that in mind when we come to the dialogue of Joseph and his brothers. He said, go down and buy grain for us there, that we may live and not die. And Jacob is really acting he's sort of taking over the reins again. The picture of Jacob until this moment, with everything, his age and everything else, was that the boys had sort of taken over and sort of was treating him like a senile old man. But here's Jacob, who simply has got a plan and a resolve, and he gives instructions, and he sends those boys, 10 of his 12 sons. Of course, they think Joseph is dead, but they still, as I have experienced with a lot of families, when you ask how many siblings did you have from someone, they'll oftentimes mention all of their siblings, and then they'll immediately follow up with, but one of my brothers died when he was, a teenager. And you'll hear that number honoring even the deceased sibling, even though they have been part of the family system for decades perhaps, but that's one of those numbers, and that's going to be true here. So he sent Joseph's brothers, who went down to buy grain in Egypt. And then in verse 4, when Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with his brothers, for he feared that harm might befall him. And that expression, harm might befall him, is a bit more, in the Hebrew language, there are two ways of anticipating harm. One of them is kind of what we talk about when you decide that you're going to play football. You're liable to get hurt. I did. I had a concussion. I had my shoulder dislodged. I had a finger ripped from its socket several times. I've got some bruises from playing football, but that's harm. The expression here, however, means disaster. It means death. So Jacob is not wanting to send Benjamin, his favorite son, because he's just scared to death that he's going to lose him too, just like he lost Joseph. Thus the sons of Israel came to buy among the others who came, for the famine was in the land of Canaan, as well as the other territories. In other words, Joseph's brothers were not going down there by themselves. They were part of a migration of many clans. In fact, there is a stele that has been discovered on one of the Pharaoh's tombs, where it's a picture of outsiders, foreigners, coming and bowing down to the Pharaoh that offers them, through some money or whatever else, grain for their family members or their nation back home. So this was a very befitting sort of thing. Verse 6, now Joseph was governor. That word governor, again, is a rather late Hebrew word that doesn't appear until the Babylonian captivity. It is a word that means somebody who's master over something, either territory or the treasury, or the governor is somebody who rules over and is master over certain assigned posts that way. And yet here it is mentioned in terms of how how Joseph behaved as he was assigned by the Pharaoh. He was the governor over the land. He it is who sold to all the people of the land. In other words, as we kind of saw outlined in the previous chapter, Joseph has been assigned by the Pharaoh to be in charge of his kingdom, except for his own food. That was kind of a strange thing for us. Joseph was not responsible for feeding the Pharaoh. He had his own private kitchen and tasters that would make sure he wasn't going to get poisoned. But Joseph had control over the rest of the nation, particularly the land, and how he set up granaries throughout the land in major cosmopolitan cities to store up grain for 7 years, and then when the famine would hit, he would begin to parcel out the grain to the people to keep them alive. And God had blessed him so much that he had plenty of grain to share with others who had come from outside districts. And so when his brothers get there to this governor, Joseph's brothers came and they bowed themselves before him with their faces to the ground. Again, you can see that on the Egyptian carvings, the stele. It is one of the things that we know. The closest that we get it in our day and time is the curtsy or the bowing whenever the prince or the king of England or someone of royal majesty enters the place. We don't do that to the president or to the vice president in America. You shake their hand, you're respectful, but you don't bow. But in antiquity and in certain countries still, you bow. You're trained not to look them in the eye even. Your eyes are cast down and you bow as they walk by. You're going to try and catch a glimpse, but you're not supposed to sully their presence and their features by your gaze or whatever. And as I shared with you before, as police today will tell you, when you are arresting someone, you want them to be face down on their ground. Human beings are at the most vulnerable when they are face down. They cannot do anything quickly dangerous. For them to stand up, they have to use all of their muscles, not to attack you, but to push away from the ground and stand up. Whereas if they're on their back, they can use their free hands to swipe at you or pull your legs out from under you. When they're on the ground, they are really vulnerable. Plus, it exposes your neck. Because one of the things we know was that if the king that you were approaching, and this is especially true in the story of Esther, who goes in and bows before the king, something very dangerous. Most of the time, if you had not an assigned audience or request from higher ups and you went in and approached the king, you basically said, you can kill me or you can let me talk to you. And when you go in with your face to the ground, your neck is exposed, and his henchmen, his swordsmen are standing thereby, and all he has to do is do thumbs down, and your head's cut off, and you didn't even know it's coming. It was an incredible, vulnerable act of saying, we are helpless before you, we are at your mercy. And so his brothers come in, and of course Joseph is dressed like an Egyptian potentate. He's in fact, as we read through the story, we won't get into tonight, but when he's talking to his brothers, he's using an interpreter. And he knows Hebrew just as well as they do. But he uses an interpreter because it's part of his masquerade to keep them from recognizing him. And again, they're not going to stare at him. It's kind of surprising to us because as much as I hate to say it, I can see my boys at a distance and recognize them by their gait or their walk. You know, you can't escape. You know, they might try to deck themselves out and hide behind some sort of Halloween costume, but they are easily spotted by me. And it's, you know, so I mean, you would think that the brothers, but they haven't seen. It's been 20 years. And Joseph was a young teenager, 14 years of age perhaps, when they sold him and got rid of him. He's a grown man, and some of us don't age real well, so I'm not sure how you're going to countenance why he wasn't easily recognized. But they didn't look at him. He kept the whole persona of his position in office. He even speaks harshly to them. Joseph saw his brothers. This is verse 7 now. And he knew them. He's looking for them. He knows that the famine is out there. I want to see my brothers. I can't wait for them to show up. You can almost hear the longing in Joseph's heart to see his family. He saw them. He recognized them. But he treated them like strangers and spoke harshly and roughly to them. In the Hebrew, the word that we translate, and he knew them, and the word translated treated them like strangers, or almost homophobic. It's that fancy word that says it sounds alike. It's homophone. Yeah, not homophobic. Homophone. I got the Greek going, but I added too much to the last one. Yeah, it's almost like it's really a play on words. It's really interesting to read in the Hebrew for those of you who can read Hebrew. I passed it, but that's all I want to say about Hebrew. And so he spoke roughly to them like they were strangers, even though he knew them. And he says, "Where'd you come from?" They said, "From the land of Canaan, to buy food." Thus Joseph knew his brothers, but they didn't know him. And Joseph remembered the dreams which he had dreamed of them. Do you remember that dream? He's the one stalk of wheat that's standing, and the rest of them are bowing down to him. And he's the
He's the good ear of corn.
The grain of corn. The other is just falling over as he stands there in the midst of them. He remembered that, and he said to them, in contravening to that, he says to them, "You are spies. I don't trust you guys. You've come here to see the nakedness or the weakness of the land." There are two words in the Hebrew for nakedness. One of them is the physical humiliation of being without clothes. The other one is the experience of vulnerability, of being weak, of being defenseless. That's the word that's used here. You came to spy out the land and to see. You want to steal the grain from me. You don't want to. You're not going to be a good, trustworthy partner in some sort of agreement between nations. You came here to see how vulnerable we are, how weak we are. And they said back to him, "No, my lord, but to buy food have your servants come." And then they continue the story that's going to prick Joseph's heart. They say, "We are all sons of one man." We're not a gathering, a cadre of spies who come from different families. We all come from the same family, from one man. We are honest men, your servants. We're not spies. We're not a cadre or consortium or a department of FBI that has nothing to do with it. We all come from the same family. We got the same daddy. We're not spies. And he said to them, "No, I can see through your lying. It is the weakness of the land that you have come to see." And they said, "We are your servants. There are 12 of us brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. There's only 10 of us here because the youngest is this day with our father, and one is no more." They're talking to the one that is no more. They presume him to be dead, to be locked away and totally unavailable. There is 12 of us. And I'm choosing to stop our story there. It's gonna unfold from there. I've already sort of ruined it a little bit for you, but the thing that I really wanted to, it's a good timing. I don't need to give you the whole bale of hay when I've got this size of a group, but the thing that struck me, and I've run into this several times, oddly enough, while I was preparing this Bible study through this week. One of the things that as a pastoral counselor I deal with is what we call family scripts. One of my dearest friends was the child of an alcoholic. And his father was a very abusive alcoholic before he became clean and sober. Actually, sadly, his dad had been clean and sober and part of AA for maybe 20, 25 years. And something happened emotionally. I don't know if his wife died, his second wife. It wasn't my dear friend's mother, but his dad went off the deep end and literally died within weeks of having to start drinking again because it was poison for him. And he basically committed suicide by drinking alcohol. But my friend remembers very distinctly that growing up, he made a promise to himself that he would never drink because he couldn't stand what it did to his daddy. Couldn't stand what kind of monster his father would become when he was drinking. He made a vow that he would never drink. He found himself in the early days of 20 years of age starting his own business. And it was a business that not only required a lot of manual labor, but it was a business that had some ups and downs as it began. He's very stable now, a remarkable man. But in the early days, the tension and the pressure emotionally that would sap him as his wife and 2 kids, a boy and a girl, and everything else was with that, he found himself drinking. And he was an alcoholic overnight. That DNA stuff in him, he swore he'd never do what his daddy did, and here he was. One drink and he was down the hill until finally being divorced, almost losing his business, unable to stay sober, found himself in an apartment in this city, bereft of any kind of furniture. He had to sell it all to get his next drink and had nothing left but a 12-gauge shotgun. He found himself sitting on that carpetless apartment floor with a shotgun stuck in his mouth, crying and crying. Had enough wits about him to call a dear friend of his who was part of the AA program. And the man went to see him and sat with him on the floor as he's got this shotgun in his mouth and he's got his fingers on the trigger and it's loaded and he wants to end it. He can't stand it anymore. And I don't remember how long he sat there in that position until his sponsor brought him to the place where he said, you can start again. Right now, you can turn your life and your will over to God as you understand God. And He will give you the courage to back out of that. I heard that story when my dear friend was 25 years sober. And remarkable, remarkable man. But his family script, when he learned without words or instruction or any kind of article of this is what our family does. We learn to do that. We know that parents who abuse were almost always abused themselves as children. And we carry that family script along. And one of the things that we know emotionally that will break the cycle of that family script is oftentimes, like with my dear friend, a radically dangerous crisis that they lose control and the family script you can't drink enough to avoid what I'm feeling. And all of a sudden in that moment, God presents another opportunity, another option. Here are brothers who are representing their father dying without food, finding themselves in a foreign land, being accused of being spies, having to confess that we've got 12 of us boys. Well, one's gone. Baby's back home with daddy. And they begin at that moment, the beautiful thing, anticipating the rest of the story that I know and you know, is that crisis moment is going to be an occasion for God to step in and do something very unique and very transformative for that family. that has tremendous payoff. We are a people that brought out of slavery in Egypt, the Jews will say to this day, brought to a promised land. All of that is beginning in this story. They're going to end up, Jacob's going to come to Egypt and is going to die there. Joseph is going to die there. And there's going to be a Pharaoh that doesn't remember Joseph and is going to incarcerate those people. And in their suffering, God's going to hear them and bring the Passover night meal and the angel of death and the angel of resurrection and power to lead them out of that dastardly situation to a promised land. As misfits, as urban cowboys that don't even know how to survive out in the desert. And God gets them through that, through a whole generation until they come to the promised land. And Christ is anticipated in all of that drama, in all that trouble. Family stories are very important. Remembering your family story, is really a way to break and to reinsert and to create for your children and your progeny a whole different way of going. This one last story that I've always loved. I heard this when I was pastoring in Kentucky. That was a homiletician was sharing with us in a chapel experience, if I remember correctly, about the young bride preparing her first Thanksgiving meal for her new husband. And they were scrapping by. They had very little money, and but he went all out and bought a big old ham for them. And she's fixing to prepare the ham, and I mean, he basically has bankrupted the family to buy this ham. And he walks in the kitchen, and she's cutting the end of the ham off, and that's a lot of meat back down there. What are you doing? Well, that's the way my mother always did it. Well, why'd you do that? Well, I don't know, but we always cut the end of the ham off. Well, you call your mother and ask why. And so this new bride calls her mother, who always fixed the ham this way, and says, my husband's yelling at me for cutting off the end of the ham, and you always told me to cut off the end of the ham. What's going on? And her mother says, well, sweetheart, you cut the end of the ham off because it's the only way it'll fit in the pan. She had a pan big enough. You just cut the ham off, because it doesn't. Are you kidding me? Fits perfectly well. We got a big pan, a big oven. It's amazing how we'll continue those patterns without ever asking the question. I wonder this is what God would like for me to do with who I am and where I've been and what I've drugged to the party. He's always got something brand new for us. Always something brand new for us. And next week we'll get on to the rest of the story. We will do that. We will do that. Let me say a prayer and get rid of you. Oh God, thank you for your word. Thank you for the reminder that no matter our family stories, no matter for the traditions that have informed us and shaped us, you are the one who's making a new creation in Jesus Christ. You're making us worthy of heaven's best dreams. God, thank you for loving us enough to give us a brand new start, for granting us a chance to not only be forgiven, but to make new adventures become ours and enter into new tasks. Oh God, thank you that every day is afresh with your presence and with the novelty that you summon us to embrace and to work with. God, bless my family. Bless our time as we anticipate ways of witnessing to you and sharing with others what we have found that is so nourishing in your presence. Bless them and protect them on their journeys home, for I give them into your keeping in the name of Christ our Lord. Amen. Thank you so much. You're dismissed, and you will turn off the movie version of it.